At 19, Nora Vass had $47, a duffel bag with a broken zipper held shut by a binder clip, and a letter from the county that said she was no longer their responsibility. The foster family she'd lived with for 3 years had taken back the bedroom the week she turned 18. She'd spent the last years sleeping in her car, then a shelter, then her car again, until the transmission went and the car became a thing she watched get towed from a Kroger parking lot on a Tuesday morning while she stood on the curb holding everything she owned. That was in March. It was now October, and she was standing in front of a lawyer named Gerald Pitt, in a building that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee, signing a document she barely understood about a piece of property she had never heard of, left to her by a man she had never met. His name was Clete Voss, her grandfather, her mother's father. Her mother had left when Nora was 4, and nobody had ever explained where to or why, or whether she was coming back. What Gerald Pitt explained, in the careful way lawyers explain things to people they are not sure are listening, was that Clete Voss had died 11 weeks ago on a Tuesday, same as the car, which Nora would later think about more than once. He had left his property to her specifically, not to her mother, not to the county. To her, by name, with her date of birth, with a note in the margin of the will that read, "Make sure she gets this herself." The property was a grain silo on 12 acres outside a town called Aldine, 4 hours north. It had not been operational since 1987. Gerald Pitt told her the assessed value was listed at $1, which was the county's way of saying it had no value, but that the land itself was real, and the deed was clear. He slid a set of keys across the desk, one large key on a ring with a tag that read door, and one small key on a separate ring with no tag at all. She signed. She put both keys in the front pocket of the duffel bag where the zipper still worked. She did not know yet what the small key opened. The county had a program. A woman named Sandra drove her to the bus station and gave her a voucher and a card with a number to call if she needed anything, and Nora thanked her and did not call. The bus took 3 hours and 40 minutes. She watched the fields outside flatten and then rise and then flatten again, and somewhere in the second hour she fell asleep against the window and dreamed about nothing she could remember. The town of Aldine had one main street, a hardware store, a diner with a hand-painted sign, a post office the size of a garage. The property was 2 miles north of the last stoplight. A man at the bus stop named Ray, who was waiting for a package and not a bus, offered to drive her when she showed him the address. He was 60-something, with hands that looked like they'd spent 40 years outdoors. He didn't ask why she was going there. He just drove. The road narrowed from asphalt to gravel to 2 tire tracks through a field. Then, she saw it. The silo was maybe 60 feet tall, corrugated steel, rust-colored not from paint, but from decades of oxidation that had moved in slow orange waves down from the roof seam. The outbuilding beside it, a low 2-room structure of cinder block and cedar, had a door that sat slightly open, which meant either the latch was broken or someone had been inside recently. 3 of the window screens were gone. A rusted downspout had pulled away from the wall and hung at an angle, still attached at the bottom, swinging gently. The gravel around the base of the silo was clean, raked. Recently, someone had raked the gravel and then left, or died, and the door had drifted open on its own after that. The walls of the outbuilding were solid. She pressed her palm flat against the cinder block and pushed. Nothing moved. Ray said he'd leave her to it and drove back down the 2-track. She watched the truck until it disappeared, and then she unlocked the outbuilding door with the large key and went inside. There was a wood stove, cold, a cot with a rolled sleeping bag on top of it, A folding table with a crossword puzzle on it. Pencils set down mid-word. The pencil still sharp. She looked at the crossword. 7 across, 5 letters, River's Edge. The answer wasn't filled in. She set the puzzle down exactly as she'd found it and kept moving. The outbuilding had 2 rooms. The front room had the stove, the cot, the table, and a pegboard with tools hung on it in outlines. Someone had traced the shape of each tool in marker so they'd always go back in the right place. Every outline was filled. Nothing was missing. The back room was a workshop, a workbench, a mounted vise, cans of linseed oil and wood stain and waterproofing compound arranged by size on a shelf above the bench. In the corner, a steel filing cabinet, 4 drawers, locked. She put the small key in her front pocket so she wouldn't forget it. The door from the outbuilding to the base of the silo was unlocked. She went through it. The inside of the silo was dim. Light came from a ring of small vents near the top, 60 feet up, and from the open door behind her, and it was enough to see by once her eyes adjusted. The floor was concrete, swept clean. The walls curved around her, corrugated steel on the outside, but lined on the inside with something else. Poured concrete, she thought at first, then realized it wasn't consistent. She walked the circumference slowly with one hand trailing the wall. Most of the inner wall was concrete block, set in mortar, painted over once and then left. But when she got to the north quadrant, maybe 15 feet of arc, the material changed. She stopped. She pressed both palms flat. Poured concrete. Not block. Not the same mortar pattern. A continuous pour. Set differently. A faint seam where it met the surrounding block on either side. Not a crack from settling, but a deliberate line, clean on both edges. She knocked with her knuckles, moved 6 inches. Knocked again. The sound changed. She knocked on the surrounding block wall. Solid, she knocked on the poured section again. Not hollow exactly, but different. Less mass behind it. She went back to the pegboard and took down a cold chisel and a hand sledge. She took a headlamp from a hook by the door. She went back to the silo. It took 2 hours and 20 minutes. The mortar at the seam cracked first. Then the poured section came away in sections, heavy and resistant, and she worked from the top down, careful, stopping twice to clear debris from her feet. When the last section came free, it fell inward, and she caught the edge of it on the way down and lowered it as slowly as she could. She was breathing hard. Her arms were shaking. Behind the concrete was a space roughly 4 feet wide and 3 feet deep, framed in treated lumber that it held. On the floor of the space sat a footlocker, military green, with a hasp and a padlock. She took the small key from her pocket. The footlocker smelled like cedar and machine oil, and something underneath both of those, paper and time. She lifted the lid. A journal. Brown leather, the covers soft and creased from handling. It was thick. She fanned the pages and estimated 200, maybe more, filled front to back in small block print. Careful and even in the early pages, shakier toward the end. A manila envelope, unsealed, containing photographs. She set it aside. A metal lockbox, the kind sold at hardware stores, with a combination dial. A folded paper taped to the top with the combination written on it in the same block print as the journal. She spun the dial, opened it. Inside, a stack of savings bonds, banded, and a handwritten ledger sheet on top. The total at the bottom of the ledger read $211,847. She read it 3 times. A sealed envelope, white, business-sized. Her name on the front in the same careful block letters. Nora Vass. She set it on top of the lockbox. She sat down on the concrete floor with the journal and opened to the first page. January 4th, 1971. First full week on the property. Cleared the south field of brush. Got the silo inspection done. Passed. Weather holds. Plan to have the first bin operational by March, she read. The early entries were records, bushels, weather, equipment repairs, prices received at market. In 1974, he wrote that he'd lent a neighbor named Dorsey Mack $800 to fix his combine and told him to pay it back when he could, and Dorsey never brought it up again, and neither did he. In 1978, there was a fire in the adjacent county that took out 3 farms, and he drove a load of timber over on a Saturday without being asked, and didn't put his name on anything. In 1983, he wrote 2 lines about a woman in Aldine named Frances Cole, whose husband had died and left debts, and he had paid the debts through the lawyer so she wouldn't know who. Then the entries went back to weather and equipment. In 1989, the entries changed. Shorter, a daughter was mentioned, Carol left again, and then nothing more about her for 2 years. In 1991, her name appeared again. Carol called from somewhere in Florida, sounded okay. Said she has a daughter, Nora, 4 years old. I asked to speak to her, but Carol said she was asleep. Nora stopped. She read the sentence again. She turned pages slowly now. March 1994. Heard from a woman at the county who knew Carol. Said Carol had moved again. Asked about the girl. She didn't know. August 1999. Hired a man to try to find Carol. He found her in Tennessee. She said Nora was in the system now. I called the county. They said I wasn't listed as family. I called a lawyer. He said I'd need Carol to sign something. I called Carol. She didn't answer. I wrote her 3 letters. They came back. November 1999. Tried again. Same, March 2003. Nora is 15 now. I looked up the school district where she was last listed. I sent a letter to the school addressed to her, just in case they'd give it to her. I don't know if they did. I hope they did. I hope she knows someone out there was thinking about her. Nora had not gotten any letter. She sat on the floor of the silo with the journal open in her lap and did not move while the light from the vents above moved from afternoon white to early evening gold to a low amber that barely reached the floor. She read every page. The last entry was dated September 9th of that year, 6 weeks before he died. The handwriting was slow and large, the letters uneven. I have thought about this for a long time, and I think I have done it right. The silo is hers. Everything in it is hers. She will find it. Or she won't, but I believe she will, because she is her mother's daughter, and her mother was stubborn as good timber, and that was the only thing that ever got her in trouble, but it is also the only thing I ever really admired. I don't know what she looks like. I hope she is warm. I hope she has enough to eat. I hope somebody told her she was worth something. Because she is, because I have known since she was 4 years old and I never got to tell her, and that is the thing I will be sorriest about. Nora, I'm sorry it took this long. The place is yours. He had signed it, Cletty. She held the journal against her chest in the dark and did not speak. She slept on the cot that night under her grandfather's sleeping bag, which smelled like wood smoke and pine, and she did not move until light came through the east window. She made coffee on the wood stove with grounds she found in a can in the cabinet above the sink. The water ran brown first, then clear, and she let it run clear for a long time before she filled the pot. She stood at the window with the mug and looked at the silo in the morning light and drank. She found the filing cabinet key on a hook inside the cabinet above the sink, behind the coffee can. The filing cabinet had 4 drawers, and each drawer was divided into labeled folders. The top drawer was property records, deeds, inspection reports going back to 1968, a soil survey, a survey map with the 12 acres outlined in pencil. Second drawer, Financial records year by year, going back to 1971. Third drawer. Folders with people's names on them, alphabetical. She opened the A's. There was a Aldine Methodist Church envelope with a receipt for $1,200, dated 1996, marked anonymous, roof fund. Behind it, Carl Atkins, with a note that said new water heater, October 2001, told him the church paid for it, $340. She closed the drawer. She would come back to it. The fourth drawer was different from the others. One folder, no label, in the very back, behind a hanging divider. She almost missed it. Inside was a photograph of a woman she didn't recognize, and behind it, a photograph of a little girl, maybe 4, sitting on a porch step squinting at the camera. On the back of the second photo, in her grandfather's handwriting, Nora, summer 1987. She was wearing a red shirt with a strawberry on the front. She could not remember the shirt. She turned the photo over and looked at herself for a long time. She heard gravel crunching outside and went to the door. A woman in her 60s was coming up the 2-track in rubber boots, carrying a covered dish in both hands, moving carefully over the uneven ground. She had gray hair cut short and the look of someone who'd been up since 5. "You must be Nora," the woman said. She said it like she'd been expecting her, which she had. "I'm May Atkins. I live down on the county road, been living there since before you were born. Carl's my husband. Your grandfather fixed our water heater when we couldn't." She stopped. "Well, that's a longer story. I brought you a hot dish and some bread, and I wanted to make sure you knew the well pump has a trick to it, or you'll stand there forever waiting for water pressure." She showed Nora the trick to the pump. She sat on an overturned bucket in the outbuilding and ate a plate of the hot dish herself while Nora ate, and she talked about Clet Voss the way people talk about someone they admired without knowing quite how much until the person was gone. He had fixed things. That was what she kept returning to. He had fixed things quietly and without ceremony and without expecting to be thanked. And if you tried to thank him, he would find somewhere else to be. He had driven people to medical appointments when they had no car and told them he was going anyway. He had taught 3 different boys in the county how to weld, and none of them knew the lessons had been free. He had kept a list, May had seen it once, by accident, on the workbench, of everyone in a 20-mile radius who was behind on their property taxes. She didn't know what he did with the list. "He talked about you," May said. She said it carefully, not to many people. But to me sometimes, if we were talking about something else and it came around to it. He was proud of you, and he didn't know you, and I always thought that was a particular kind of love that doesn't get named very often. She left the dish and said she'd come back. If you've made it this far into Nora's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. The letter arrived before the lawyer did. Not a physical letter. A man in a black SUV with out-of-county plates who pulled up the 2-track one Thursday morning 16 days after Nora had arrived. He was 50s, silver hair, dark jacket over a collared shirt. He had the look of someone who decided things. He stood at the edge of the gravel with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at the silo the way people look at things they are calculating. His name was Walter Pruitt. He said he represented a development group that had been in conversation with the county about agricultural land in the corridor, and that he wanted to make her an offer before things got complicated, and the offer was $58, $000 for the 12 acres and the structure. He said he understood she'd come into the property recently and that she might not be in a position to maintain it, and that $58,000 was a number that could change her situation significantly. Nora said, "It's not for sale." Pruitt explained that the county had the property flagged for a back tax assessment from 1994 through 2001. 7 years, when the silo had been listed as non-operational, and that there was a question about whether the deed transfer was clean given that outstanding assessment. Nora went inside. She went to the filing cabinet. Third drawer T's. Clete Voss had paid every year of back taxes personally, in full, through a payment made to the county in 2004, and had kept the receipt. She found the folder in 40 seconds. She brought it outside and handed it to Walter Pruitt, and waited while he read it. He read it twice. A man named Owen Briggs drove up while Pruitt was standing there. Owen was 72 and had been a property attorney in Aldine for 40 years before he retired, and May had called him that morning because she had seen the black SUV and recognized it from a meeting her husband had attended at the Grange Hall the previous spring. Owen read the receipt and the deed transfer and the original title record from 1968, and he explained to Walter Pruitt, in a patient and unhurried way, that the title was clean, the transfer was clean, the back taxes were settled, and the property had been left to a legal adult heir with full documentation, and that if his clients wanted to continue the conversation, they were welcome to put something in writing, and Owen would review it. Pruitt left. Nora asked Owen what she owed him. He said he'd been trying to figure out for 20 years who had paid for his youngest daughter's hospitalization in 2002. When Owen had been between insurance, and the bill was $9,200, and he'd been 1 week from taking out a second mortgage. And it had been paid anonymously through the hospital's billing office. And he'd never found out who. He'd found out 3 weeks ago, cleaning out Clete's filing cabinet with Gerald Pitt, going through the estate. He said, "There's nothing you owe me, Nora. This was paid for a long time ago." She sat on the steps of the outbuilding that evening with the sealed envelope. She had been carrying it in her jacket pocket for 16 days. She opened it. "Nora, I am writing this in the spring when the fields are coming back and the light is long in the evenings and I can hear the creek from where I sit, and it is one of the best sounds I know. I want you to know I have known about you since you were 4 years old. I tried to find you. I tried more than once, and I am sorry I couldn't try harder. I should have hired more people. I should have kept trying longer. I don't know if this letter finds you at a good time or a hard one, but I know this place will be the right size for you, because I built it in pieces over 50 years to be exactly that, and I always knew it would go to you. The land is paid for. The debts are settled. What's in the lockbox is for whatever you need first. The rest is yours to decide. One thing, keep the coffee on. You'll see why." Clete, she folded it in half and set it on the step beside her and looked at the silo in the last of the evening light, rust and gold, and listened to the creak. The first thing she fixed was the downspout. It took a morning, 2 lag screws, and a bead of sealant along the fascia where water had been getting in. She found everything she needed on the pegboard, in the right outlines. A man named Paul Surrett showed up the second week. He was 68, retired, and lived a half-mile up the county road, and he had spent 30 years doing finish carpentry before his knees gave out. He said he'd seen the light on at the property and had been meaning to come by, and he brought a level and a story about Clete teaching him to read a blueprint in 1979, and he never asked whether he was needed. He just came. He showed up at 7 and left at 4 and ate lunch sitting on the tailgate of his truck, and they worked mostly without talking, which suited them both. Word moved the way word moves in small places. Not loudly, but thoroughly. A woman from the Methodist church came with firewood and 3 other women, and they spent a Saturday cleaning the outbuilding top to bottom and left a casserole in the refrigerator, which Clete had bought used from someone in 1998, according to the receipt she found taped inside the cabinet door. A retired electrician named Don Hess rewired the outbuilding panel for the cost of materials and said Clete had done him a favor in 2005 that he didn't want to talk about. May came back every few days with food and the particular company of someone who didn't require anything. By the third week, Nora had the outbuilding livable, the well pump reliable, and the south window reglazed. By the sixth week, Paul had rebuilt the workbench, and she had called Gerald Pitt and begun the paperwork to cash the first bond. She drove to Aldine one morning and paid the property taxes on Frances Cole's house, the woman Clete had helped in 1983. Frances was 81 and still lived there. Nora did it through the county office and didn't leave her name. She left groceries in the truck bed of a man she'd seen at the gas station, counting change to make up the difference on a $20 fill. She drove away before he came back out. She kept the coffee on. She left the outbuilding door unlocked. The girl showed up on a Tuesday in February, which was the same day of the week as the car getting towed and Clete dying, which Nora had stopped believing was coincidence. She was 18, wearing a thin jacket over a hoodie, carrying a canvas bag on each shoulder. Her name was Delia. She'd heard in Aldine that someone up on the county road might have work. She was thin in the way of someone who'd been rationing. She had the look Nora recognized, the look of someone who had been keeping track of what they were owed for long enough that they'd stopped expecting to collect it. Nora asked if she wanted coffee. Delia said yes. They sat at the folding table. She'd bought a second chair in October, and Nora asked what she could do. Delia said she could do anything that needed doing. She said it the way people say things they mean, literally. Nora said there was a room in the back of the outbuilding that she'd been thinking about putting a proper door on. She said it had a window that got morning light. She said the rent was work, and she wasn't keeping track of the hours. Delia looked at her for a moment. She said, "Why?" Nora thought about it. She said, "Because somebody did that for me. Except they never got to tell me, and I'm trying to finish what they started." Walter Pruitt came back in March, alone, no jacket this time, in a regular truck instead of the SUV. He stood at the edge of the gravel and looked at the outbuilding, the new downspout, the regraded gravel pad around the base of the silo, Paul's rebuilt window trim. He didn't say anything about an offer. He'd grown up near Aldine, he said. He'd left when he was 20 and had been in development for 30 years. He said he had some lumber in the truck bed he'd had left over from a project. He asked if she wanted it. She said yes. He unloaded it and left. Carl Atkins came by in April, May's husband, whose water heater Clete had paid for in 2001. He was quieter than May, and he stood on the steps for a while before he said what he'd come to say, which was that he was sorry he'd never figured out sooner who had helped them, and that he wanted her to know what it had meant at the time, which was that they hadn't lost the house, which was the thing that would have lost everything else. She poured more coffee. They sat on the steps and listened to the creak. She pulled the filing cabinet to the back of the outbuilding that evening to make room for Delia's cot frame, and when she moved it, she found a folder that had slipped behind the bottom rail, loose, unlabeled. She opened it. It was a medical record receipt from 2001. Atkins, May L., hip replacement surgery, Methodist Hospital, Aldine, paid in full, $7,400. The payment method was listed as cashier's check, made out to the hospital. No name on the check. Below the receipt, in Clete's handwriting, a note. Carl doesn't need to know the amount. May's the one who'll carry it right. Delia was on the other side of the room sanding the new door frame. Nora looked at the receipt for a while, and then put it back in the folder and put the folder in the cabinet and closed the drawer. She didn't say anything. The sanding continued. On the last Friday of April, the dogwoods along the county road were blossoming, white and unhurried, the way they did every year without being asked. Nora walked the perimeter of the 12 acres at dusk, the way she had started doing on evenings when the work was done. The silo caught the last of the light and held it in the rust and steel, warm as a lamp. She went inside and climbed the maintenance ladder on the interior wall to the first service platform, 20 feet up, and sat with her legs over the edge and looked up at the ring of vents at the top, the sky beyond them going deep blue, and the first star appearing through one of the gaps, and then another. She had $47 when she arrived. She didn't have $47 anymore. She climbed back down and went to the outbuilding. She could hear Delia in the back room, the radio on low, a pencil moving on paper. She was taking an online class, had been for 3 weeks. Nora set the kettle on the wood stove. She straightened the crossword on the table, which had stayed where she'd found it since October. She had looked up the answer in November, but hadn't filled it in. River's Edge. 5 letters. She picked up the pencil. She thought about it for a moment. She wrote B-R-I-N-K. She set the pencil down in the same groove it had worn into the paper over all the years Clete had held it, and went to pour the coffee. She was 19 years old. She was just getting started.